Hello, I'm here with Rodney Manzo. Rodney is the founder and CEO of Anvyl, a provider of outsourced logistics with a specialty in direct-to-consumer brands. Rodney, as I said, founder and CEO, is a direct brand old guard, having leapt from the US Army to Apple to Harry's, the DTC shaving pioneer. During and since, he's distinguished himself as both a thought leader and a practice leader in the area of outsourced logistics. And I'd say it's a fair bet that there's no issue, no topic that's more prominent and more challenging to both big brands and small brands today in the United States as we're coming out of the pandemic than the question of logistics and supply chain management. Rodney, welcome. Thank you for being with us. Really appreciate this.
Yeah, thank you, Randall. Excited to be here and excited to go through a little bit more on supply chain.
So I have a million things that I want to talk to you about, as you know, because we were chatting before and we've been chatting offline for a while. But I want to go through a little bit of history because you have an interesting history and you've been a lot of places, you've done a lot of things. I want to focus in on one in particular. I mentioned that you were with Harry's in the early days. Harry's and Dollar Shave Club were forming around the same time, around 2011, 2012. Took very different paths. And I'm wondering, if you can walk us through a little bit of your history, coming out of military logistics, going into technology and then ending up in the D2C industry just at the beginning of D2C companies beginning to have a kind of a self-conception of what they're doing.
Yeah, my background's pretty simple. I'm an inch wide, mile deep in supply chain. Even before that, academically, industrial systems engineer. When I was in the military, as a master load planner, load station, purchasing agent, really moving and buying things around the world. Apple, no better company, big company that really focuses on supply chain. The complexity to do that at scale with that quality over and over again. So anyone who has a Mac or iPhone, it's very difficult with so few defects. But when I was transitioning, I wanted that smaller knit kind of team that was scaling. It was like us versus the world. And I really thought that's what Harry's was, being a pioneer in this space. They're following suit from Andy over at Bonobos. They're following from, the Warby team, which Jeff Rader founded. And what we're looking at is how do you do something very, very different in a world that has Gillette and Schick owning 80% of the global market, really, really underdogs in the space. And that's what we're looking at. And a big part of that truly was the supply chain, how to do things differently that has never been done before.
So as I kind of look at, say, the Warby history and kind of Jeff's role there, it seems the kind of, if not the initial impetus, certainly one of the initial impetuses. Here you have an industry like the shaving industry, where you have one or two very dominant companies that are effectively setting prices because of their dominance. And the theory of the case, very demonstrably with Warby, was, we could if we can figure out our processes well enough, we could charge less and give a lot of that money back to the consumers in the form of lower prices, but still keep our margins high. That there is an advantage in being the kind of the disruptor going after the incumbent and having a fair amount of kind of a process margin to work with if you could nail it. But the question of nailing it, that's hard because you're putting it together with kind of lots of outside resources. So when you came to Harry's, how did you figure that out? How did you figure out how you could go at these dominant incumbents and do it better than them without having the footprint that they had?
Yeah, there's a lot of similarities between the two industries. So Warby, you have Luxottica controlling the majority of the market. Harry's obviously was Gillette that we're just discussing. So the thought was, you see Gillette, what are they doing? Gillette's focused on kind of these older generation, like this, not really in touch with younger, like today's day and age buyers. And they haven't changed their messaging or their product in years. They haven't had to. What they went from is 3 blades to 4 blades to 5 blades, and they're just adding blades and charging you more money. But what you don't know is a blade to add that is, we're talking about fractions of a cent. So what we did at Harry's, we tried to do things obviously a lot different. We tried to make the brand approachable for the mass. We tried to make it so it was different color categories, which was very, very bold at the time. So if you went into a retail or online, you could see it. But we tried to go to the supply chain and make it different. And the way we did that at first, Harry's didn't own a factory. So we're sourcing all the components, sometimes through third parties and really middlemen, to breaking that down, going direct to suppliers, to owning a factory and make razor blades. And that vertical integration was really what started being different. Very, very difficult, something that had never been done for a startup ever before that. Buying a factory for $100 million when you're a small company just showed, I think, the vision of Jeff and Andy.
So the question I want to ask, which really is going to lead us into how you started Anvyl, is that would also seem to be risky to me. That owning the factory, yes, it gives you the access to the manufacturing capacity that you need, but it limits your flexibility. How do you balance between the being able to fulfill demand while at the same time maintaining flexibility, which I think for everybody in our audience today from the D2C brands is something they're wrestling with every hour of the day?
Yeah, this goes truly into being a world-class supply chain and a world-class supply chain operator. And when you do that, you have to break down every single thing within your supply chain. You have to know your raw materials. You have to know all the logistics, inbound, outbound. You need to know warehousing, distribution centers. You need to know your sub-tier suppliers, your CMs, whatever it may be, you need to know those cold. And going back into Harry's, what they started to do was they started seeing, okay, if razors are a competitive advantage, where am I going to find those? What happened is there's only 5 roughly companies on the planet that makes razors. You have Dorco in Korea. You have a company Kai in Japan. You have Schick, you have Gillette, and then you had Feinteknik in Germany. That's it. So what would happen over time, as you would expect, it's a supply and demand game. So if Harry's supply increased and they didn't own that capacity, they were going to be in trouble. And they didn't want to be in trouble based on having to throttle their acquisition. They want to be in trouble by increasing their costs of their product, which companies will do, because like making a physical good like a razor blade is very, very time and capex extensive. So they decided, they're like, if we're going to win by owning our own factory. But that trade-off is only knowing your entire supply chain. It doesn't make sense for all industries. Going back to Warby doesn't make their own glasses. They don't need to. There's just so much supply of that. It's a very inexpensive manufacturing process. They didn't need to. So it's just knowing your supply chain and what makes sense.
Yeah, I was thinking as you were talking that it shows that D2C is too broad a moniker, because the difference between the D2C apparel company, where supply kind of literally exists in millions of places, versus razor blades, where the capacity existed in 5 places, you might as well be talking Mars and Venus.
Without a doubt. And that's knowing, what you can do. Like if you're making a t-shirt, you can do that anywhere in the world, right? If you're making a razor blade, it was those 5 locations. So it's critical.
So is that the inspiration for Anvyl? The idea that, while there are commonalities to being a D2C company, there are also vast differences. And so figuring out how to semi-customize your outsourced supply chain is pretty much job one. I mean, I'm putting words in your mouth, but I'm thinking it through at the last, in the moment.
Yeah, I mean, Anvyl just started from legitimately my personal pain, and it just made me question things over and over again. Why hasn't supply chain changed in 30 years? Why am I spending $300 to $500 million through an Excel spreadsheet just trying to focus on things? Why am I flying out to China, Japan every single month just to have eyes on things outside of phone calls, fax machines? And that pain just didn't make sense, and it wasn't going away. You can imagine Apple have a lot of money to buy things, and I couldn't find a solution. And I thought the world that was different from the old incumbents, right? These brick and mortar, just highly focused, Fortune X companies compared to a direct-to-consumer company, they were in need of a lot of different things. And the technology aspect was something that's critical and was not there. So just simply put, we have a vision and mission to allow anybody to use an operating system like Anvyl to create physical products. And we want to make sure we're a solution that can do that with them.
So walk us through a little bit of terminology here. Is Anvyl a 3PL, a 4PL, or a 5PL? And by the way, what the hell do all those L's mean?
Yeah. The quick answer, we're none of those. But so if you're looking at 3PL, how I like to break this down, I'll break it down into a few levels. So the first is you have your raw material supplier, you have a warehouse distribution center, you have logistics, both two sides, the inbound coming to your warehouse and the outbound. So what you have is in 3PLs, like the old world, where they'll control bringing everything in, where you have it in a warehouse distribution center. And a lot of times they'll control the outbound, like to you or to a retailer. That's a 3PL. Mm-hmm. But you have in a 4PL, they're going to control more of this. They'll control the inbound logistics. They'll control the packaging. They'll control the warehousing and then the logistics to you as a customer or DTC or to a retailer. So they control a broader bit of the stack. Within 4PLs, there's a lot of technologies in the space. When I was mentioning we're not that, you have Flex, FLEXE, you have Where to Go, you have ShipBob, numerous technologies there. And then the latest one is a 5PL, which is always fun because supply chain loves their acronyms and these different terms. Just think they own everything. They're kind of controlling both how the raw materials are being produced coming in, the inbound logistics, the warehousing, the packaging, the outbound logistics, all the way to that experience into you as a customer or retailer. So it's just building upon them. Very simple term. But what I would say for direct to consumer, which is really hot right now, is outsourcing this to those 4PL types of solutions that have a technology layer underneath these ShipBobs. And I think that's a hot trend and something that's super value add right now for anyone trying to make a company.
Now, you called Anvyl an operating system for D2C brands, and you're making a distinction between that and being a 4PL or a 5PL. What is the distinction in the way you operate with your customers?
Yeah, two aspects. We sit before. So anything around a purchase order, production, inbound logistics, we digitize that, visualize it, and we put in just amazing intelligence. So we help brands see around the corner. We hand off to a distribution center, where a 3PL or 4PL would start and where they're really good at what they're doing. But a 4PL will typically add a layer of service to that. Like if you're pick and packing a good to place into like kind of set or kit, they have a service layer and a potential technology layer. We are pure tech.
So I would come to you if I'm wearing my Bombas socks right now.
Yeah.
If I want to be the next Bombas, I'd come to you because I have an idea. I have some designs. I have a marketplace that I'm going for that isn't filled by anything else that I've seen out there. And I would go to you, and you would help me with the material sourcing, the inbound logistics, and then you'd basically get me started and help me through the manufacturing processes as I grow, but still handing off for the middle miles and the last mile.
Yeah, where we sit, we can help you get started, we can help you sustain, and we can help you grow, all three. So our tool, what we quickly said is, what I was doing is, operating with my hair on fire in a black box world, throwing people at problems. One Anvyl could really do the work of 15 plus people, depending on the size of the company, right? It's a 20 to 30x ROI. The value and advantage of technology is just unbelievable. Not just for that one-off, but through the eternity of the product. And that's where we sit in. So really from source to deliver of a product, we have a marketplace that people can come in and quickly find suppliers in seconds that we vet around social responsibility, operations, quality, finance, make sure they're unbelievable. But really our key is PO, production, logistics management, all through a cohesive, smart platform.
I want to get back to you in a second on one of the big issues that we're addressing at the summit, which is sustainability. But before I do, I want to ask, I think the biggest question that's on everybody's minds in the audience, and that is, what are or what might be the lasting effects of the pandemic? I mean, you and I were chatting before about how 10 years ago, if you told somebody you were in supply chain management, their eyes would glaze over and they change the conversation. Now this is front page news in the wake of the pandemic, port closings, trade wars, material shortages, just a sclerosis throughout the global supply chain. The question I would have, I think anybody would have, is how have conditions changed relative to those who would be the next Warby Parker or the next Harry's or the next Dollar or the next Blue Nile? Is it just becoming impossibly difficult, or are there still avenues? Or conversely, is it better for them than it is for the large brand manufacturers?
I'll say it depends on if it's better or not, and it depends on what you're making and how you're making it. So holistically, what COVID did, it definitely has ripple effects throughout the supply chain in a few ways. The first is knowing your entire supply chain in general. And I was talking about that, but it's super critical. So if you didn't know who your raw material supplier was in the past and you started being short, whatever that was, you weren't delivering it to a customer if you're a direct-to-consumer company. Mm-hmm. You now need to know everything. The second is with contingency planning. A good example of this is two companies. Levi's is a great example. What Levi's does, they have contingency across their entire supply chain, same with Colgate. What they do for establishing their supply chain practices, a small percent can only be produced at one supplier. Mm-hmm. So when you look at Levi's, what they're doing now, they're just scaling up like crazy because they can shift globally. So when things are down in China because of power or COVID in X location, it doesn't matter for them. So that's the second. The third is really developing a partnership and being empathetic. And I think that's something like never before. You have to really know your supplier, develop a supplier relationship, and foster that. And the world of transactional supply chains, I don't think will ever come back, because people like to work with people they like. And in order to have that, where you're going to get supply when supply is short from one location, it's going to be a relationship game, not necessarily a money game.
So for the disruptor brands, the D2C brands in about half the audience is D2C brands, half the audience is big brands. For the D2C brands, this is a question, but it's in the form of a statement. What I'm hearing from you is that, hey, you may think you've got so much flexibility that you really don't need to know those people who are running those white label manufacturing facilities out there. But you know what? You need to know them, or we need to know them on your behalf, because you can't get away being arm's length anymore.
No, and I think that's going to be a major shift. Not knowing is a death sentence for a direct-to-consumer company, because you can control a shift. Like, let's go back to the Harry's example. Let's say Harry's was purchasing razor blades from a third party, which happens, and they didn't know it was actually Fine Technic, and they couldn't cut to them to understand that relationship, to understand control supply. Maybe they can invest in CapEx to have more supply or anything else, give them more money. That would never have happened. Knowing everything, you then could augment whatever's happening and adjust your supply chain. So that's what's critical at a direct-to-consumer company, especially one where you don't have economies of scale. You know, if you're Colgate, going back to them, the purchasing power is unbelievable.
You have leverage.
Easy, but you don't in a supply, like a direct-to-consumer startup world. So you have to be smarter and do different things than a Colgate would.
But you're also saying that it's a caricature to say that, oh, big brands, all they're doing is using their muscle and leverage, and small brands are using their flexibility. Because, there are some big brands that are fantastic at remaining flexible within their supply chains because of these decades of practices that they've built specifically to remain flexible.
Yep, absolutely. And it goes to Levi's example, where let's say only 20% of their supply chains in any one location. That's not economies of scale per se. they're intentionally going smaller. They could just, have 80% and have all that purchasing power, but they're choosing not to for a very strategic reason.
So, I mentioned sustainability, but I actually think there's a larger kind of topic point there. When we began doing this research on brand disruption, going back, 5 years, and even going back to, Andy Dunn, who you mentioned before, and the rules that Andy promulgated about digitally native vertical brands, one of the characteristics of the D2Cs has been really prominent, has been their mission-driven nature.
Yeah.
So one of those missions is sustainability. We see that fairly consistently, but you see other missions. And you're also saying that kind of visibility into the supply chain and the know your supplier is a requirement. A requirement if you're going to be mission driven, because if you don't, you can really veer off at the expense of really all the values of your company.
Yeah, no, I mean, without a doubt. And those are two separate things, but they are definitely two that come together, Randall. The one about knowing your supply chain. You should know, things like child labor, the conditions that they're working in, the materials, the hazardous, materials that are around there, like everything. You should know end to end, because at the end of the day, supply chain is people driven. And if you're a good operator, you want to make a better place in the world for the people that are producing these products. The other is the mission aspect that you mentioned that a lot of these companies have done. They'll do buy one, give one. They'll donate money. When I was at Harry's, we were donating millions of dollars to different charities. We're also donating our time. So it was twofold, where we try to help. And it, as organizations like City Year, they went and actually helped the military and other organizations. But I think that's the difference between direct and consumer nowadays. They're looking at the world and trying to question how do they make it better, instead of just looking at it for profitability and for revenue.
So I've been given the high sign from the control tower that we have to wrap up, but I want to leave the last word with you. If you were going to look at the landscape, from here on out, given what we've been through over the past 2 years, how would you characterize those companies, big or small, that will be successful relative to those that will lag behind?
Yeah, I look at the future of supply chain around technology, and it's a haves and have-not. If you do not have technology, you're not going to be a leader. You're going to crash and burn, because that aspect is throwing people and money at problems instead of technology to help you see around the corner. A big initiative for us, and for hopefully the supply chain technology that people utilize, is intelligence. We have something called Anvyl IQ. It helps our brand see around the corner. Helps them, if you order 1 million goods today, we can tell you months from now if you're going to get those goods. That's the world of supply chain. And you could augment and shift things around, change promotions, change locations you're shipping, change modes of shipping. And that's the world of supply chain. And that's the one I'm excited about. And hopefully everyone starts putting it in place. Well,
This is great. Rodney Manzo, thank you so much for joining us. This was a absolutely necessary conversation on a necessary set of themes at the IAB Brand Disruption Summit. I can't imagine anything better than having you on our virtual stage. So thank you, and I look forward to following up.
Thank you, Randall. Really appreciate it.